He told them Germany was still winning. He told them victory was near. But when a group of generals were taken on a secret flight to the front, what they saw broke them completely. Burned cities, starving soldiers, endless columns of retreating men. Hitler's invincible Reich had already turned to ash. Some wept, some prayed. One drew his pistol in silence. This was the moment they realized they hadn't just lost a war. They had lost their souls. The Führer bunker breathes cold in candlelight. Maps cover every inch of the war room's walls, their contours bleeding from blue into red. Corridors of conquest shrinking by the day. 3 bare bulbs cast shadows that seem to move independently of their sources, creating an atmosphere where nothing feels still, nothing feels certain. Adolf Hitler stands rigid before the situation maps, his pointer raised with the same authoritative gesture he's wielded for a decade. His voice, thin but commanded, cuts through the tobacco-stained air. The Russians overextend themselves. Here, at the Vistula, we strike. Here, we reclaim what is ours. His finger traces lines that exist only on paper and in will. General Heinz Guderian shifts his weight. His face is a landscape of exhaustion, deep lines carved from years of fighting wars he knew in some cold corner of his mind could never be won. He glances sideways at Colonel Friedrich Wilhelm Müller, whose jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. Neither man speaks. Hitler continues, and his words have the rhythm of a man talking himself into reality. The Ardennes offensive succeeded beyond our expectations. Now we consolidate. The Americans fracture, the British weakened. The Russians will meet resistance they haven't anticipated. He pauses, watching their faces like a conductor waiting for musicians to find their notes. We do not merely survive this war, gentlemen, we prevail in it. Guderian's eyes move back to the maps. The red has been bleeding eastward for months. The Wehrmacht, once the instrument of continental conquest, now defends scraps of territory with divisions that exist on rosters but not on battlefields. He knows this. They all know this. Mein Führer, Guderian begins, his voice careful, measured. The Eastern Front reports increasing pressure at... Hitler's hand rises. Not violently, almost gently, but the gesture contains absolute authority. I'm aware of the reports. I'm also aware that defeatist thinking spreads like infection. It weakens resolve. It makes men see obstacles where opportunities exist. His eyes, still sharp despite the tremor in his hands, settle on Guderian. You will proceed with renewed confidence, General. You will inspire your men with certainty, because certainty is the only weapon they require now. Around the table, generals nod. It is a dance they have perfected over 13 years, the choreography of submission disguised as loyalty. Doubt flickers across each face like firelight, and just as quickly, each man extinguishes it. To let it burn risks more than any Russian offensive. Outside the bunker, Berlin trembles under bombardment. Inside, candlelight flickers across a map of a war that ended long ago, and men who refuse to acknowledge it. 2 days later, sealed orders arrive in hand-delivered envelopes. No telephone calls, no public channels. The Gestapo understands the power of mystery and the power of summons. General Ernst Kaltenbrunner opens his envelope in his office, the morning light filtering weakly through blackout curtains. 5 typed lines. By order of the Führer, you are to report for an inspection flight to the Eastern Front. Your departure is scheduled for 0600 hours, April 12th. Discretion is paramount. Signed, General Oberst Jodl. He reads it 3 times. An inspection flight. To the front. A summons that feels, despite the formal language, like an opportunity. Perhaps the Führer had listened after all. Perhaps there was a role yet to play in the reversal everyone whispers about in darkened rooms. Kaltenbrunner isn't alone. 7 other officers receive identical envelopes on the same morning. General Guderian, Colonel Müller, Major Hans Steinfels, a handful of others. Men trusted, men informed, men whose doubt has been noted and now, apparently, requires correction. They don't know this yet. They know only that they've been chosen. In the officers' quarters, the atmosphere shifts. Conversations that had grown cautious suddenly bloom with possibility. Steinfels paces his room, reading and rereading the order. An inspection, he murmurs to himself. But of what? If the Führer wants us to see the front, it's because something is changing. He allows himself a fragile hope, the kind of emotion that has become dangerous in its rarity. Guderian, sitting in his quarters, makes a different calculation. He has been to the front. He knows what's there. Chaos, exhaustion. Units commanded by junior officers because the senior men are dead. Defensive positions held by men eating bark from trees. This inspection feels like something else. A performance, perhaps, or a test. But he cannot refuse. To refuse is to confirm the whispers of defeatism that already circle his name like vultures. The air among the officers crackles with anticipation and dread in equal measure. They pack hastily, in silence, each man alone with his calculations. Outside, the city continues its death throes, indifferent to sealed orders and inspection flights. The Führer has chosen them. The question no one dares ask aloud is, choose them for what? The radio broadcast begins at 2100 hours. Joseph Goebbels' voice carries through the Reich with the kind of certainty that sounds like truth when you need it to. Citizens of the Reich, today we celebrate the unshakable resolve of our people and the renewed strength of our forces. Berlin stands resolute against the storm. Our soldiers advance on all fronts. The enemy, fractured and demoralized, retreats before our combined might. History will record this moment as the turning point, the instant when the tide of war reversed and destiny aligned with German determination. The broadcast echoes through the Führer bunker's corridors. In the officers' quarters, men listen while they prepare for departure. It's difficult not to. Goebbels' voice has a way of filling every space, demanding to be heard. Then the film reels. Newsreel footage flickers across the projection screen. Soldiers in crisp uniforms marching in formation, rifles gleaming. Children waving flags along Berlin streets. Military parades showing equipment that hasn't existed in sufficient quantities for months. German tanks rolling across unidentified terrain with text reading, "Victory advances on the Eastern Front." The footage is seamless, persuasive, professional, the product of a propaganda apparatus that has perfected the art of transformation. Major Steinfels watches with his fellow officers, his jaw clenched so tightly it aches. The footage shows smiling soldiers. The soldiers he's commanded lately don't smile. They're too hungry, too exhausted, too aware of how the war actually feels when you're not watching a screen. Guderian stands at the back of the room, arms crossed. He's learned to compartmentalize, to receive propaganda as a separate thing from reality, like speaking two languages that never intersect. Somewhere above them, real aircraft drop real bombs. Somewhere to the east, real men die for terrain that will be surrendered within weeks. And here, in this bunker, a voice and a series of images tell them the opposite is happening. The contrast is suffocating. The documentary ends with a montage. The Brandenburg Gate wreathed in light, crowds cheering silently, the Führer's profile set against an impossibly radiant sky. The final words, "Germany will endure. Germany will triumph. Germany will prevail." The lights come up. Officers file out quietly, each carrying the schizophrenia of the moment, the broadcast's certainty warring with their own knowledge. Tomorrow they fly east. Tomorrow they'll see what the cameras are not showing. But tonight, Goebbels' voice still echoes, insistent and absolute. Outside, Berlin burns. The broadcasts continue. Reality and propaganda have become so entangled that even the men who know better sometimes lose the thread between them. The airfield is grey and military, geometric precision imposed on a landscape scarred by bombardment. The tarmac holds cracks like desperate scrawls. A Junkers Ju-290 transport aircraft waits, engines already running, bleeding black smoke into the pre-dawn sky. The officers arrive in pairs, summoned like pupils before an examination. General Guderian descends from his vehicle with the bearing of a man walking toward execution. He carries no luggage. The flight, they were told, would be brief. An inspection. A return by evening. Colonel Müller is already there, reviewing something in a leather folder. His fingers tap a pattern against the paper, anxiety given rhythm. When he sees Guderian, he closes the folder and offers the slightest nod. No words are necessary. They've served together long enough to know what silence between them contains. The others arrive in succession. Kaltenbrunner, stern and calculating. Steinfels, trying and failing to appear unconcerned. 3 more officers, whose names matter less than what they represent, a carefully selected audience for something. An SS officer at the aircraft's door checks their papers with mechanical precision, then steps aside. The officers begin to board. Guderian takes a moment before ascending the stairs. He looks back at the airfield. The scarred tarmac, the skeletal remains of other aircraft, the anti-aircraft batteries pointing uselessly at a sky the Luftwaffe no longer controls. He thinks about how wars end. Not with dramatic collapses, but with small surrenders of fact, day after day, until denial becomes the only strategy left. Inside the aircraft, the interior is dim and cold. Ribbed metal walls, fold-down canvas seats, the smell of fuel and something else. Uncertainty, perhaps. The aircraft shudders as engines power up. Steinfels settles into a seat and removes a small leather notebook from his jacket pocket. His fingers find a pen. He writes steadily in a hand that trembles slightly. 12 April, 06:15 hours. Departed for Eastern Front inspection. The Führer believes the tide turns. I wonder if belief is enough. He pauses, then adds, the Führer still believes. He stops writing. It's both a statement and a warning, to himself and to history, should history ever care enough to read it. The aircraft lurches forward, tires complaining as they move toward the runway. Through the small porthole windows, Berlin recedes, burning, diminished, defiant. The sky is pale and vast and indifferent. As the wheels leave the tarmac and the ground falls away, each man settles into silence. Anticipation, dread, and the peculiar loneliness of flight. The moment when escape still seems possible and return is still theoretical. The aircraft banks toward the east, toward the front, toward whatever awaits them. Behind them, the bunker, the broadcasts, the lies, still carefully maintained. Ahead, reality. But they don't know this yet. The landscape below unfolds like a wound that's been left to fester. At first, the officers crowd the portholes, peering downward with the intensity of men seeking confirmation of something they've already decided to believe. Below them, the countryside rolls towards the horizon. Forests, fields, ribbons of roads that the Wehrmacht once dominated completely. Then, gradually, the details emerge. A farmhouse stands alone, roof caved in, walls blackened by fire. Next to it, what might have been a barn, now just a skeleton of timbers. A road stretches eastward and along its length. Abandoned vehicles, some burned, some merely overturned, their windows vacant as eye sockets. General Guderian's face remains impassive. He has seen this. He has commanded men across terrain like this. But seeing it from above, seeing the scale of it, the vast scatter of wreckage across an enormous expanse, is different. It's the difference between understanding a number and comprehending what it means. Colonel Müller leans heavily against the fuselage. His breath clouds the porthole window. Steinfels still has his notebook. His hands have stopped shaking. He's begun to draw, not carefully, but quickly, almost frantically. Parallel lines representing roads, marks that might be wreckage. Below one crude sketch he writes, "Endless. It's endless." He doesn't show anyone. Below, a column of refugees moves along a road, tiny from this height, but unmistakably human. Families with carts, children, old people. They're moving west, away from the front, away from the Russians, seeking a Germany they might still believe exists. The aircraft passes over them and they don't look up. They're too focused on surviving the next mile. One of the younger officers, Major Steinfels, suddenly grips the window frame. "Mein Gott," he whispers, and the other men turn toward him. He points. A forest, stretched across several kilometers, is burning, not recently burned, actively burning. Flames rise through the canopy, and smoke ascends in a column that's visible from this altitude. Not a military installation, just a forest. Burning. Guderian closes his eyes for a moment. He's heard the reports of the Red Army's scorched earth policy, but hearing and seeing are separated by an abyss. "How long has that been burning?" someone asks. No one answers, because the answer is, it doesn't matter. Whether it's burned for days or hours, it represents the same thing. Territory that was German is becoming nothing. And whatever the Führer says in the bunker, whatever the broadcasts claim, the landscape below tells a different story. General Kaltenbrunner's face has gone pale. He pulls away from the window and sits back in his canvas seat, staring at his hands as if they might provide an explanation. The aircraft drones eastward. Below, the wreckage continues, a tank immobilized, its turret facing a direction it will never turn. A village where fires still smolder. Another column of people, smaller this time, moving with the desperation of the pursued. One whisper, barely audible over the aircraft's engines, comes from somewhere in the fuselage. "Mein Gott, we're finished." No one contradicts it. No one can. The landscape has spoken, and it has told them something they can no longer deny. The landing strip is barely a strip. Pocked earth, hastily cleared of debris, bordered by trenches that cut the landscape like surgical scars. The aircraft descends through smoke. Whether from engines or artillery fire is unclear. As the officers disembark, the smell reaches them first. Not the clean smell of military operations, but something organic and corrupted. Death, unwashed bodies, open latrines, fear rendered into scent. The heat intensifies it. Even in April, the earth radiates decay. A Wehrmacht officer meets them, young, with the hollow eyes of someone who has seen too much too quickly. His uniform hangs loose. He salutes with mechanical precision. "General Guderian, gentlemen, welcome to the Eastern Defensive Line." The word defensive seems to exhaust him. What unfolds is not an inspection. It is a descent into a truth that cannot be unseen. The fortified line consists of hastily dug trenches, some barely deeper than a man's waist. Tank traps made from whatever materials were available, broken vehicles welded into barriers, logs planted at angles, sandbags that have rotted open, no concrete bunkers, no proper defenses, just desperate improvisations. The soldiers are scarecrows. Uniform hanging from frames that no longer fill them. One man's face is wrapped in bandages yellowed with pus and age. Another stands in a trench with only one arm, and it takes the officers a moment to understand he's still on active duty because there's no one else. A third cannot stop shaking, whether from cold or something else. Kaltenbrunner counts them silently. There are perhaps 300 in what should be a divisional defensive position, 300 where there should be 3,000. The mathematics of defeat rendered visible. Then they see the children. 3 boys, none older than 14, manned an anti-aircraft gun. They wear Hitler Youth uniforms that might have fit them once. Now the clothes seem to wear them. One of the boys looks up at the officers, and there is no fear in his expression. He's already witnessed things that would destroy fear. Fear requires a hope to destroy. Steinfels stops walking. His jaw works silently. One of his hands moves to his chest and grips the fabric over his heart. An older commander, perhaps a major, it's hard to tell through the filth, approaches to brief them. His voice is hoarse from shouting orders that won't change anything. "The line holds," he says, and it's clear he's rehearsed this lie for so long it's worn grooves in his throat. Enemy pressure is intense, but our men remain resolute. Guderian doesn't respond. He's walking toward the children with the anti-aircraft gun. As he approaches, the one who looked up stands, trying to straighten his body into a military posture his frame can barely support. Guderian doesn't speak. He simply looks at the boy, really looks, and something in his face cracks like old paint. Behind them, in a shallow grave marked with a cross fashioned from rifle parts, a child soldier from the Hitler Youth lies dead. His arm still clutches a Panzerfaust, a weapon meant for destroying tanks, given to a boy for destroying himself. His badge is still pinned to his chest. The officers move through the position like pilgrims through a cathedral of horrors. Every detail is a testament. The ammunition that's running low, the medical supplies that consist of bandages and nothing else. The food ration printed on a paper that no longer reflects what men actually receive. A soldier shows them his boots, holes in both soles, stuffed with newspaper to simulate insulation. Müller leans against a trench wall and simply stares at the ground. Kaltenbrunner's face has become unreadable, so controlled it might crack at any moment. One of the younger officers begins to ask a question, then stops. There are no questions left. By the time they return to the landing strip, silence has swallowed them whole. General Karl von Steingl stands motionless in front of the corpse. He's known throughout the Wehrmacht as a man of iron. Cruelty dispensed with precision, discipline maintained through fear, weakness purged from units like infection from an organism. He's ordered executions for desertion. He's beaten men who questioned orders. He's built his reputation on the cornerstone of absolute unfeeling. The child is perhaps 13. Hitler Youth badge pinned precisely. The Panzerfaust lies beside him, already growing cold. The boy's face is turned slightly upward, eyes open, expression caught between terror and resignation, the face of someone who understood death was coming, but not that it would arrive so quickly, so completely. Von Stengel kneels. It's not a gesture of prayer, though it might resemble one. His knees crack against the rough earth. His hands, which have signed execution orders, signed orders to move deeper into Russia, signed orders to hold positions that would become mass graves. These hands, pressed against his face. When the sound emerges, it's barely human. A keening that seems to come from somewhere beneath his military bearing, beneath the careful architecture of authority he's constructed across decades. His shoulders shake. His breath comes in ragged gasps. Officers watch from a distance, unsure whether to intervene, unsure whether this is a man experiencing a genuine breakdown or some kind of performance. But no general performs this. This is something breaking open that was never meant to break. Another officer, Oberführer Richter, known for his rigid adherence to ideology, turns away. His face goes white and then gray. He walks toward a trench, bends and vomits until there's nothing left. When he straightens, he wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and doesn't look back at the kneeling general or the child or the structure of military authority that both of them have served. Von Steingl remains on his knees. His hands grip the earth as if the ground itself might provide answers. A subordinate approaches hesitantly, unsure of protocol when a general falls apart in front of enlisted men. "Sir," the subordinate offers quietly. "Perhaps we should—" Von Steingl's hand rises, not to acknowledge the offer, but to silence it. He continues staring at the child's face, at the badge, at the Panzerfaust. Years of carefully maintained emotional distance are being liquidated in real time, and everyone witnesses it. When he finally stands, his face has been reorganized by the act of weeping. The cruelty is still there. It hasn't been erased, but it's been joined by something else. Recognition, complicity, the terrible knowledge that this child is dead partly because von Steingl issued orders that children should be armed and told to expect victory. He turns to his officers and speaks quietly, "What have we done?" No one answers. The question isn't really a question. It's an epitaph. Colonel Friedrich Wilhelm Müller is explaining the ammunition shortage to Oberst Henning when the argument begins. The supply officer is defensive. "We do what we can with what we receive. The roads are compromised. The factories don't exist anymore," Müller interrupts quietly. "Not in any functional sense. We're managing an extinction, not a military supply problem." The words settle into the small command tent like a stone dropped into still water. Oberst Henning, a man in his 60s who fought in the First World War and hoped to retire before the Second ended, stares at Müller. "That's defeatist talk, Colonel. Precisely the kind of thinking that—" "What kind of thinking is that?" Müller's voice remains level, but something has shifted inside him. Perhaps it was the child with the Panzerfaust. Perhaps it was the footprints in the mud that led nowhere. Perhaps it's simply that the exhaustion of denial has become heavier than the weight of honesty. Does that acknowledge reality? We've been defeated for a year. Only the Führer refuses to see it. Everything since then has been performance. Around them, soldiers have stopped moving. The tent has become an amphitheater for something dangerous. "You will take that back," Henning says quietly. Very quietly. "Which is worse?" "No," Müller answers. "I won't. I've taken back every lie they asked me to take back. I've saluted every failure and called it strategy. I've watched children die on the ground we'll lose in a week. And I won't take this one back." Henning's hand moves toward his holster, and for a moment, just a moment, it seems as if the Reich will resolve its internal contradictions with a bullet. But outside the tent, machine gun fire erupts from the eastern line. The Russians don't care about Wehrmacht officer disputes. The moment passes. When the gunfire stops, brief silence follows. The particular silence that suggests dozens of men have just died for positions that have already been lost. Henning's hand falls away from his holster. "Report to the bunker," he says to Müller. "The Führer will want to know about this conversation." "Yes," Müller says, and there's something almost peaceful in his expression. "I imagine he will." He walks out of the tent toward the eastern line, toward the sound of small arms fire and the dying. No one tries to stop him. When authority begins to contradict itself, soldiers don't know anymore what side of power they're supposed to be on. The aircraft is silent except for engines and wind. 8 officers sit in the dim fuselage. 8 minds, each processing what they've seen, each understanding that they've been transported across a boundary from which there is no clean return. The Führer bunker seems impossibly far away. Not in distance, but in reality. They've occupied 2 different universes in the space of 6 hours. Guderian stares at his hands. He's a general, and his hands have commanded thousands of men into positions they couldn't hold. The mathematics of those decisions is suddenly visible to him in a way it never was before. Kaltenbrunner's eyes are closed, but he's not sleeping. His eyelids twitch, images behind them, images he'll likely carry for whatever remains of his life. Steinfels opens his notebook. His hands shake as he writes, "What have we become? What were we even pretending to protect?" He doesn't finish the thought. Near the back of the aircraft, Major Hoffman removes his iron cross from his uniform. He holds the medal in his palm, the elaborately crafted symbol of military achievement, and simply stares at it. It seems impossibly heavy now, impossibly light. He tilts his hand, and the medal drops to the aircraft's floor, rolling slightly in the turbulence before settling against the metal ribbing. No one moves to retrieve it. It lies there as a small object of absolute indictment. Müller, when he arrives at the aircraft, having finally walked away from the Eastern Line, sees the medal and nods as if it confirms something he's already understood. He takes his seat without speaking, and the aircraft wheels begin their rotation eastward, toward Berlin, toward whatever comes next. The engines drone on, a sound that might be prayer or might be funeral music. In the dim light, 8 men who know too much now sit in careful isolation from one another, each harboring truths that cannot be spoken aloud, each carrying secrets that will, in different ways, destroy them. The Führer bunker is exactly as they left it. Maps on the walls, the same maps with the same bleeding red lines, candles casting the same indifferent shadows. It might have been hours or years. The spaces where they stand feel like a place that exists outside time. Hitler enters the briefing room with the peculiar energy of a man who's convinced himself that everything depends on this moment. Around him, staff officers maintain a careful choreography of loyalty and alertness. The Führer wants a report. The inspection flight will confirm the resilience of the Eastern Line. Everything will be explained through the prism of optimism that has calcified into rigid requirements. "Gentlemen," Hitler begins, settling into his chair with the slowness of a man whose body has begun the process of age acceleration. "Your observations. What have you seen?" Guderian stands. For a moment, it seems as if he might speak the truth, that the lines are collapsing, that the soldiers are children and ghosts, that the war ended a year ago, and only the fact of surrender remains to be certified. His mouth opens. "The lines are holding, mein Führer," he hears himself say. The words emerge without his permission, automatons responding to decades of conditioning. The men show exemplary resolve. Enemy pressure is intense but contained. Around the room, other officers deliver their own carefully constructed lies. Yes, the fortifications are adequate. Yes, morale remains resilient. Yes, with proper support, the lines can be maintained. Each lie is a small abdication, a death of something inside them, but they all perform it with the precision of men long practiced in self-betrayal. Hitler listens, and satisfaction settles across his features like a mask, his trembling hands still momentarily. His eyes, which have held something between madness and vision, briefly seem to relax. The generals have confirmed what he already believed. Reality has been voted down by authority. When the briefing ends, the officers file out in reverse hierarchical order. In the corridors of the bunker, beneath the weight of concrete and earth, they move in separate directions toward different quarters. Not one of them speaks to another. That night, in his study, General von Steingl sits at his desk with a service pistol in front of him. He doesn't load it. He simply looks at it for hours, at the child's face in his memory, at the iron cross on his chest, at the man he's become through choices that seemed, at the time, to be unavoidable. Around 3 a.m, he places the barrel in his mouth and pulls the trigger. By morning, he's become one more secret the bunker keeps, a suicide attributed to exhaustion. Nothing more. The other generals don't speak of it. Speaking would mean acknowledging that they know why he did it. Acknowledging that would mean they too are guilty. The machinery of the Reich continues its rotation. Maps are updated. Orders are issued. Lies are refined and redistributed. And 8 officers who now know the truth move through their roles like actors who've forgotten they're supposed to care about the performance. The streets of Berlin are a geography of collapse. Entire blocks have been reduced to rubble that the city has simply learned to accommodate. Buildings stand with their interiors exposed, furniture suspended in mid-air on the edges of voids, children's drawings still visible on walls that no longer have roofs. The sky above is perpetually grey, as if the clouds themselves are afraid to clear. General Guderian walks with Colonel Müller through the Tiergarten district. Refugees move through the streets with the slow deliberation of the dying. An old woman sits beside a cart containing everything she possesses, which is almost nothing. A child, perhaps 8 years old, with eyes that have forgotten how to focus on anything but the immediate moment of survival, watches them pass with complete disinterest. On a wall, a faded poster still clings to concrete. Berlin is defended. The paint has peeled away in long strips, revealing the layers of previous messages beneath it. Older promises, older certainties, all weathered into irrelevance. Müller stops in front of a storefront. The window has been boarded over, but someone has scratched words into the wood. The Führer is gone. Why aren't we? They know, Müller says quietly. The population understands what we're still pretending not to. Guderian doesn't respond. He's stopped beside a street vendor, a man so thin he might be a skeleton that has learned to walk. The vendor is attempting to sell what appears to be soup made from water and vegetable scraps. A woman purchases a small bowl with coins that have almost no purchasing power anymore. Further down the street, a young Wehrmacht soldier has plastered leaflets across a Goebbels propaganda poster. The leaflets are Allied propaganda, dropped by the thousands. The war is over. Your Führer has abandoned you. Lay down your weapons and live. Someone has already torn most of them down, but a few remain, creating a layered statement. Official promises beneath enemy truth, both competing for attention from people who have stopped believing anything. An SS patrol moves past, and Guderian and Müller immediately fall silent. The patrol doesn't stop them. The SS has more immediate concerns now. Control is fragmenting. The apparatus is devouring itself. They turn a corner onto Unter den Linden, where the grand avenues of Imperial Berlin have become a canyon of destruction. The university, symbol of German intellectual achievement, stands with its roof destroyed, bookshelves visible through the windows like exposed ribs. The State Opera House is a burned-out shell. The Reich Chancellery itself shows scorch marks from bombardment. An elderly man stands in the middle of the street, simply staring at the ruins. When he sees Guderian's uniform, he approaches. His words come slowly, as if dragged from somewhere very deep. "General, will someone tell us when it's over? When can we begin to understand what happened?" Guderian has no answer. He's a general who's lost a war. The man is asking something only historians will be able to address, and those historians have not yet been born. They return to the bunker as evening falls. The city lights are dim. Blackout is still maintained despite the futility of it. In the darkness, Berlin continues its process of becoming ruins, and the generals continue their descent into a bureaucracy of endings. The situation map in the bunker has become a cartography of fantasy. Hitler stands before it with a pointer, and his voice carries the peculiar intensity of men who've constructed entire realities from willpower and denial. Around him, generals and staff officers maintain the posture of attention, though some are barely awake, maintained upright by exhaustion and duty that no longer quite exists. Here, Hitler insists, his voice rising. Wenck's army approaches from the west. We coordinate with them here, and we smash the Russian salient. The Allies fracture. Discord emerges. They've always been fragile. America and Russia were always destined to conflict. We simply need to survive long enough for them to destroy each other. Guderian exchanges a glance with Müller. Wenck's army, if it exists at all, consists of barely mobile remnants. Coordination is a word that belongs to functioning militaries. The fantasy Hitler describes has the elaborate internal logic of a man whose connection to the material world has been severed. Mein Führer, Kaltenbrunner attempts carefully. The reports from the Western Front suggest... Hitler's hand rises. Not a gesture, but a barrier. I'm aware of the reports. Reports that come from men who lack faith. Defeatism masquerading as information. He returns to the map, tracing lines with his pointer. Here, Fortress Berlin will be held indefinitely. The Russians cannot storm a city defended by disciplined troops. We establish a reduced but defensible perimeter, and we wait for the Allies to defeat each other in their dispute over the spoils. The generals say nothing. What is there to say to a man describing military reality as if it exists in an alternate dimension from the one they inhabit? Hitler is no longer commanding an army. He's narrating a story. He's telling himself about an army that died months ago. Hitler continues mumbling about divisions that don't exist, about counteroffensives that cannot be mounted, about strategies that require resources that were consumed by the machinery of defeat years ago. His hands shake as he traces imaginary movements across the map. His voice grows quieter, but no less certain. He's become a priest saying mass in a cathedral that's burning around him. One of the younger officers, a major who still believes the Führer must be engaged with as if he's rational, attempts to raise a practical objection. Mein Führer, if we don't evacuate... The room goes silent. Complete silence. The kind of silence that precedes violence. Hitler turns from the map with startling speed. His eyes, when they focus on the major, contain something that's no longer entirely human. Evacuate. You propose that the Führer evacuate, that he fled before his enemies, that he abandoned the capital of the Reich. His voice becomes a whisper. You reveal yourself as a coward. You reveal all of us as cowards for listening to such proposals. The major steps backward. No one intervenes. No one can. Hitler returns to his maps, to his phantom divisions, to his elaborate narration of victory. And the generals watch a man who's become unmoored from reality, fully present in a war that ended long ago, refusing the simple gesture of surrender that would allow the living to begin living again. Colonel Steinfels sits in his quarters with his journal open before him. The pages are filled with dates and observations, a record of dissent. His pen hovers above a new entry, trembling slightly. He writes, "We were soldiers. That is what we told ourselves. Professional men executing the orders of our state. But that was always a lie we told ourselves to avoid a deeper truth. We were not soldiers. We were worshippers. We built temples to a man who was made of hatred. We wore uniforms that were rituals. We marched in formations that were prayer, and when the god failed, when the god revealed himself to be merely mortal, merely mad, we discovered that we had no armor for surviving the collapse of faith." He stops writing. The words on the page seem almost dangerous in their honesty. He looks toward the door, listening for footsteps that might indicate an SS observer. Hearing nothing, he continues, "I have issued orders to kill men I did not know. I have maintained silence when cruelty was performed in my name. I have repeated lies until they became the substance of my thinking. And now that the edifice collapses, I understand. I was not forced into these things. I participated willingly. I was not a soldier serving duty. I was a worshipper in a faith built on destruction." His hand moves to tear the page from the journal. The paper resists slightly, and he must apply more force than he expected. When it comes free, he holds it for a moment. Evidence of his own complicity, his own moral failure. The stove in the corner of the room is cold. Fuel is too valuable to waste on heating. But he bends, placing the journal page inside anyway, and strikes a match. The paper catches, and the flame rises, consuming his words. As the page blackens, he thinks, perhaps this act of destruction is the only honest thing he's done in years. He watches until the paper becomes ash, until there's nothing left but evidence of burning. Then he sits on his cot and waits for whatever comes next, arrest or survival, or the simple continuation of a life that will forever be divided into before and after the moment when he understood what he actually was. The voice is calm and measured, reading from a letter that was never meant to be read aloud. "My dearest Helena, I write this knowing the probability that you will receive it is minimal. The post has ceased to function. The war has ceased to function. I have ceased to function in any meaningful way, but I need you to understand something before the silence claims me entirely. I told you years ago that I was serving my country, that duty transcended morality, that there was honor in obedience. I was wrong about all of these things. I was not serving my country. I was serving the destruction of my country. I was not enacting duty. I was enabling atrocity. And there was no honor in obedience, when obedience meant the deaths of children, the starvation of civilians, the reduction of an entire civilization to ash and ideology. I believed in something. That is perhaps the worst crime. Not the killing, not the ordering, not the silence, but the belief. I allowed myself to believe that these things were necessary, that this man, this Führer, was the vessel of something greater than myself, that my individual conscience could be suspended in service to a larger purpose. What I actually did was worship a void. I bowed before emptiness and called it glory. Forgive me for the years I stole from our lives by believing a lie. Forgive me for the version of myself I chose over the person I might have been. Most of all, forgive me for believing that a man could be made of hatred and not eventually consume everything around him, including the men foolish enough to serve him. I cannot live as I am. The knowledge of what I've done, what we've all done, has rendered existence itself a form of dishonor. I choose silence. I choose to step away from this world that I helped to destroy. Perhaps in that choice, I perform one final act of responsibility. Your loving husband, even in betrayal. The letter ends. In the silence that follows, a gunshot sounds. Distant, inside a bunker, another general resolving the contradiction between knowledge and survival by choosing neither. The shot echoes once, then fades into the ambient sound of a dying city, a collapsing state, a myth gasping its final breath. The newsreel flickers across the screen with its familiar confidence. Images of Berlin, carefully selected angles that show none of the destruction. Images of soldiers, faces bright with determination, though the eyes of those who look closely betray something else. The announcer's voice rises with practiced emotion. Citizens of the Greater German Reich, the Führer announces that final victory is within reach. The enemy, exhausted by their futile assaults against the fortress of Berlin, crumbles beneath the onslaught of our defenders. Even now, reinforcements move into position. Even now, our military genius orchestrates the collapse of the enemy alliance. Victory is not merely possible. It is inevitable. The newsreel continues with footage of parades, of crowds, archival material mixed with new filming, indistinguishable now. The line between current events and past glories has been erased. Time has been weaponized as propaganda. Remain steadfast. The night is the longest before dawn. Our struggle continues. The image flickers. There's a moment of white noise, a break in the signal. For an instant, the screen goes completely black. Then the image returns, but it's wrong. The quality is different. The angle is strange. It's footage the officials didn't intend to release. A bombed-out Berlin street, refugees moving between rubble, a soldier attempting to comfort a child who's stopped responding to anything. The official images return quickly, but the moment has registered. The lie has been interrupted by truth, and though the machinery of propaganda reasserts itself, something has been broken. The screen fades to black as the newsreel ends. A single line appears in white. Text, April 1945. The Third Reich lasted 12 years. Its truth lasted 1 day. The image holds in darkness as the sound of bombardment grows louder. No longer distant, no longer something happening elsewhere. The sound swells until it fills everything, until there's nothing but the noise of a civilization destroying itself, until even the sound becomes memory, becomes silence, becomes the void that was always waiting beneath the speeches and the salutes and the carefully constructed myths that men with power convinced themselves to believe. The screen remains black. The bombardment continues. Somewhere in the ruins, The machinery of state continues its rotation, even as the state itself becomes nothing. The last images fade. The last words fade. What remains is only the sound of ending and the knowledge that some truths, once seen, can never again be unseen.